It is Thursday, January 17th, 2019. This is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. That's me. Every week we come down and we talk about the Seattle Seahawks and the NFL. And, it's getting into draft season, so we're going to be talking more about the draft, of course. There's still 3 more football games to go in the 2018 season. We've got the AFC Championship featuring the Chiefs and the Patriots. We've got the NFC Championship featuring the Saints and the Rams. And we've got no Seahawks games to talk about, of course. It's been a couple weeks since that season ended. Pardon me. Off to a hot start here, a little bit of gas. So, but we're going to talk about again, reflect on the past season, the offense. And with me today, a field goals writer. He's been breaking down the Seahawks offensive schemes and some defensive stuff and players and a lot of the X's and O's that's helped fill in that sort of intellectual gap here on field goals that we like to bring out and have people who know the game well and can break the game down and give readers a deeper view into how the game works, and certainly goes way beyond my knowledge of the game, or at least into different areas of the game that I've worked on and studied throughout my sports writing career or whatever. It's not been my specialty, so that's why I hire people like Matty F Brown to come in and do it with his Seahawks on Tape series. And just this past week, starting his Draft on Tape series, well, he'll be breaking down draft prospects that may or may not fit with the Seattle Seahawks. Matty, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Well, thanks for having me on. That was very kind words. I'm very happy with that. I have to add that to my resume. But
yeah, do that.
Yeah, it's very sad that, no more Seahawks football. And I was looking at what to break down from the past game. And it's, I felt I need some perspective because it's quite an angry, volatile Seahawks Twitter and it's all over.
Yeah, there is a lot of, it is an interesting perspective, the anger and, the people who, and it's fair, everybody's has their right to an opinion and, every concern, maybe, well, not every concern, but many concerns are valid. And you can always say, well, there's an expectation for more, and that's fine. It's good to have more. But still, the Seahawks are coming off a 10-6 record, not too far away from being 12-4, 13-3. And yeah, maybe not too far from being the other direction. But still, I'd say by many measures, a successful season to make it to the playoffs. And, I was just looking at, say, like, for instance, the Super Bowl odds for next year. The Cleveland Browns have better Super Bowl odds than the Seattle Seahawks do to win the Super Bowl next year. And the Cleveland Browns, were 7-8-1. They're going through another coaching change. Freddie Kitchens has never been a head coach before. Most people had never even heard of him prior to halfway through the season when Todd Haley was fired. And so the perspective is the Browns are on the way up and the Seahawks, I guess, are on the way down, or just, just a mediocre or something like that, because at least from the fan perspective that goes into betting. But the reality maybe is, hey, look, the Seahawks were 10-6 and, they've still got Russell Wilson and, a lot of their players were inexperienced and maybe have grown and getting more experience next year, such as Poona Ford or Jaron Reed. And there's a lot of things to like, I mean, would you agree that maybe that's part of the interesting perspective when comparing, like, say, a situation with Cleveland to one in Seattle, and maybe it's not necessarily, I don't know. Do you see like the Cleveland Browns being, I just pulled a team out of thin air here kind of, but do you see the Browns as a team that maybe is on the way up a little bit faster than Seattle?
Well, I think what it comes down to is, Cleveland still got Baker Mayfield, who had a brilliant rookie year, despite Hugh Jackson. And Freddie Kitchens came in and he did a great job, but the fact is he's on a rookie deal and Russell Wilson isn't. And I mean, you look at Seattle, they got limited resources after John Schneider went all in on 2017. You look at the fact that, it comes down to the Browns having a rookie contract and the Seahawks not, and them having limited resources to build what is, the team showed a lot last year. I think everyone was a bit out on whether Pete Carroll could, galvanize a team and get buy-in from a group of young players. But after getting rid of, some guys who'd grown tired of his message, it seemed like he could get buy-in, and there was, it seemed like there was competition. And while these are all sort of intangible qualities, and it's, as a fan, it's all very fine margins, and you want to see that, so you kid yourself that is taking place. But it did seem like that was happening. And while while, you know, Cleveland have that rookie contract and they can build on stuff, and Seattle has few resources, they still have Russell Wilson as their quarterback. You know, it's a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tricky. I think this upcoming offseason is probably one of the biggest to John Schneider's career as a general manager, because he only has it's like they only have 4 draft picks. Like, I don't know how that happened, but it happened. And there are holes, and I think especially on the defensive side of the football, actually.
Yeah. Let's get into that here a little bit in the show. I want to start off maybe with everyone who's maybe not as familiar with where you come from, and I'm surely could use I also don't know everything about you, Matty. So, I'm curious. Obviously, listeners maybe for the first time have heard your voice and thought, oh, this guy's not from Seattle. So maybe go into like where you're from and what brought you to being a fan of the NFL and specifically the Seattle Seahawks.
So I was born in London. I am English, so your ears do not deceive you. And I had no one influencing what we call American football here, but don't worry, I'll call it football. Because I've had to learn American English and all of that good stuff. But yeah, so I was born in London, and my family got Sky Sports, and this is where I reveal myself to be a bit of a bandwagon Seahawks fan, because it was 2012, so the new Nike uniforms had just been released, and I turned on Sky Sports, which my family had just got. They're the people who show the NFL coverage in the UK. And I was like, wow, what is this dreadful sport? And then as I got into it, I was like, wow, this is truly incredible. The tactics, the scheme, the X's and O's, all of that stuff really excited me. And towards the end of preseason, I was like, well, who has the best uniform? And I know some fans really dislike the action green and the wolf grey and the whatever they call it, blue. I forget the name, but I absolutely love it. I was like, wow, that's brilliant. Seahawks have a lovely logo. Seattle seems like a really cool place. And from that point on, I was absolutely obsessed. Marshawn Lynch, I absolutely loved. There's exciting rookie Russell Wilson being so dynamic, and then there's that swagger on defense. And I don't know if it's an English thing, but from a UK perspective, defense seems to be at fantasy football has made offense popular too, but people really seem to like a dominating defense. So like in that Super Bowl, watching like Ray Lewis lead the Ravens over the 49ers somehow. I still don't know how the 49ers managed to mess that up, but it's still funny. Anyway, that was fun. But yeah, so that all appealed to me, and then I got obsessed, and then I was like, rather guiltily, I realized as my knowledge of the sport grew, that Seattle was a good team, and that I'd done what in England we call being a plastic fan or glory supporter. I'd picked a team who it turns out were very, very good and were going to have a lot of success. But I felt that was compensated by the fact that my soccer team is Newcastle United, who are dreadful. So anyway, but so yeah, picked the Seahawks, just got massively into it. And I don't know, maybe because I was worried of being accused of being a glory hunter or whatever, I just tried to learn everything about the team, everything about the history. Mm-hmm. Pretty much every day I'd just be watching clips on YouTube, reading about them, researching them. And then I discovered that I really liked the tactics more and more. Like first put in Madden and was like, what's this? And then was like, wow, yeah, I can do this and this and this. And then in 2015, I went to university at the University of East Anglia, and I played cornerback at their football team for a year. And then I suffered an injury, which meant that I couldn't keep playing, which sucked. But the defensive coordinator there was very nice to me. And he said, I've seen, because I was breaking down film for the team and helping them, like helping the players and the coaching staff prepare for the upcoming opponent. And at that point, he was like, would you like to become a defensive assistant? I was like, well, yes, please. I'd love to do that. And that just helped me grow. I started. Sorry, yeah. What were you going to say?
No, just curious. What is the amount of American football played in schools over there? Is it common? How many teams were in your league? Like, how does that work?
Well, I'd say it's very disorganized, and well, there is some organization of a type, and the sport's definitely growing, and the London Games have definitely helped with the popularity of it. But it's still very much a niche sport, and to get into it, you'd have to go to university. In our
Hmm.
in our in our in our conference, if you
Do you
like,
see?
there's yeah.
Do you see any? Does it happen very often? I know that there are English players who are in the NFL and have been in the NFL, like Jay Ajayi or whatever. Do you? I mean, do you guys have prospects over there right now? Like, are there players who are maybe 17, 18, 19? That is there like a sort of a group of people who scout out there and have on the
No,
radar?
no,
No.
no. And in
Okay.
Europe, so we do have an international team, a team who competes internationally in Europe called the Great Britain Lions, and they tend to get pretty uh, beaten up in like playing on the road in Europe. I think the best. I'm not sure who the best. But Germany tends to do quite well, and I know the controversial Art Briles is now coaching in Italy, so he's just going to be having his inverted veer offense ran everywhere. The veer and shoot, sorry, and like Eastern European teams tend to be pretty good as well. But yeah,
Okay. Yeah, and so
uh,
go ahead.
yeah. So what I was going to say was basically when you go to university, no one's played before, so what the standard is pretty. I don't know. I'd compare it maybe to like when you're in your third year, because most courses in the UK are only 3-year courses, not 4-year. I'd say the standard probably gets to about just below high school JV sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so it's not, but the important thing about that was when I was coaching it just means you get to coach the fundamentals. It's
yeah.
not really about scheme. Like on defense, we only ran 3 coverages, and it was just repping them and just teaching fundamentals and good football.
So yeah, you've spent most of your time watching the Seahawks and studying the Seahawks. So obviously in the beginning and throughout for a long time, for 7 years they had Daryl Bevel, or maybe Daryl Bevel is the offensive coordinator, and then last year obviously they switched over to Brian Schottenheimer, and you wrote a lot about Brian Schottenheimer this year, and you were pretty complimentary of Schottenheimer. Can you talk about your thoughts on Daryl Bevel and then that transition from Schottenheimer? Was it a significant transition in your mind? Was it one that as the season progressed, it was like this is a totally different offense, or this is the same offense with different nuances? Like how big of a difference was that, and did you find it to be a big improvement over Daryl Bevel?
Well, you're asking me to cast my mind back quite a long way, but I think ultimately what both coordinators at their best were trying to achieve is the run game. I mean, I think it was Matthew Berry tweeted out that under Bevel from in the whole period 2011 to 2017, Seattle was 30th in pass percentage, 25th in red zone pass percentage, third in rush percentage, eighth in red zone rush percentage, and they had the second most rushing yards and third most rushing attempts in the NFL in that span. And then you look at Brian Schottenheimer as well. And last year, it's very much wanting to get back to the run game. Bevel at his worst, really, it was when he couldn't run the ball, and then he got a bit too cute and he ran out of ideas. I wouldn't say. I mean, I have been complimentary about Brian Schottenheimer, but I've also criticised him. I think what frustrated me the most about covering the Seahawks this season was people had off-season conceptions about Brian Schottenheimer as a play caller, and they were very eager to stick to those preconceived notions about who he was as a play caller, and that they didn't think it would work when ultimately the Seahawks offense did pretty well. Um, Obviously, this last game against the Dallas Cowboys was sort of it all coming full circle and everyone going, haha, Brian Schottenheimer sucks. But I think you have to look at how Seattle's built, and I think you have to look at the remit, which is Brian Schottenheimer's, which is to get back to the run game. That's a Pete Carroll mantra. And I mean, how much do you want me to get into it? Because I could really go into it, and the whole running on 2nd and 10, like
Yeah, why not? I mean,
yeah,
it's
let's do
what
it.
people are talking to. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so my friend Bryce Rossler at Sports Info Solutions. You have people who bemoan 2nd and 10 runs, and I do understand that. Like it does seem like a like a cowardly way out, or a silly thing to do, and that you should pass more. But in 2017, Seattle eventually converted to a new set of downs 75% of the time when they called a run on 2nd and 10, and 59.4% of the time when they called a pass. So it's the way they're built. You have to look at the guard combination of DJ Fluker and JR Sweezy. They're mauling, run blocking guards. The front office has built the team to run the ball first. Justin Britt, the center, he struggled in pass pro, and honestly, he kind of looked expendable towards the end of the season with issues with anchoring and stuff like that. And if you look at what Justice Mosqueda did, which was an excellent study of offensive lines, where he added up the sack value and tackle for loss value of offensive lines. Mike Solari's offensive line, who we've praised, and he does deserve praise because the offensive line as a unit, they seem to gain a clear identity of blocking inside zone and duo, and then having a few little variations on runs, and running some trap and wham concepts and fun little wrinkles off it. But they had a clear identity, and they were a tight-knit group who could pass protect off play action, which was something, especially at the end of Cable, which is it just completely fell apart. But Mike Solari's offensive line, as well as they did, they placed in Mosqueda's study 31st out of 34 offensive line coaches. They had a sack value of minus 55.8 and a tackle for loss value of plus 23. So they were good. They're a pretty good run blocking unit. But in terms of sacks, which also Russell Wilson is a quarterback, elite quarterback, but he has certain things which don't affect, which don't benefit not being sacked. He will sack himself. But Mike Solari's offensive line placed 31st out of 34. So again, they're built to run block. Their strength was run blocking. The whole team is built to run block. And then you look at so Mookie Alexander field goals as well. I think it was him. He did an excellent article on the lack of yards after the catch from the Seahawks and Schottenheimer. And I was very frustrated that they hadn't. So I think Mookie highlighted that they hadn't run many pick plays, and they did run pick plays towards the start of the season, which I think Mookie acknowledged. But then there was an offensive pass interference call. Might have been against the Dallas Cowboys, where it came back, and it's like, what the hell? The Saints do that every time. The Patriots have, built their entire offense off that, and that's fair. And then Schottenheimer, we didn't see a pick play. Like, the pick plays went. They had like a slant corner rub in at the goal line in the end zone, designed to separate against man coverage. But overall, pick plays went, and that's frustrating. But if you look at the yak and yards after the catch, what do you need to be elusive after the catch? You can manufacture it, but mainly you need a quick, nippy receiver. And Seattle had a banged up Doug Baldwin who still managed to get open, but after the catch pretty much was happy to go down because he was really hurt. You had Tyler Lockett, who became the guy who could pretty much do it all, but he was mainly the deep guy. And then you had Jaron Brown, who is he's just a guy, let's be honest. And then David Moore, who's not really a quick, elusive type. He became like almost the Jermaine Kearse role in the offensive, winning contested catches. And then towards the end, he had a slump, couldn't quite get both feet in bounds on stuff, couldn't quite contort his body, and just had the natural sort of, he's a sophomore, isn't he? If we're going to go into that. But like it was his first season playing football in the league. And is he a sophomore?
I mean, yeah. Sorry,
I
think my thing froze real quick. Yeah, I think my end here froze real quick. That was on my computer being very slow today. So,
no.
But so I didn't hear you for a second. But I don't know. But it seems like what you're saying is that there are just a lot of variables, and comparing, say, what the LA Rams do to what the Seattle Seahawks do. One thing is that the LA Rams have really good pass blocking and better receivers in total, for most of the season, and that there are better options there. And I think that what's interesting to me is just like, putting everything in a vacuum and saying, well, this is one reason why X doesn't work, and then like putting out a stat that says 70, whatever, like that there's any sort of stat out there. Analytics are great and useful and a tool, and I would edge towards the analytics side and what the math and the numbers say to do, but at the same time there is also so many numbers that anything could be said, and if there's no counterpoint, it would just make you think, oh well, then that's the truth. But sometimes those accounts, and we're just calling like Twitter accounts, sometimes those Twitter accounts will only tweet out or retweet the things that make their thing that they believe already to be true, and confirming the things that they already know to be true, and not retweeting and not tweeting out anything that goes against what might not make their point seem as true, but those points are still out there and do exist. If that makes sense to if what I'm saying makes sense to everyone listening out there, and hopefully it makes sense to me, but it seems like, so you say that they were successful over 70% of the time when they ran on 2nd and 10 and achieving a first down. Do you happen to know what the success rate is if they passed on 2nd and 10?
Yeah, so they went on to, so Bryce was looking at eventual first down rate. So in 2018, it was 75% of the time they called a run on 2nd and 10, they'd go on to pick up a new set of downs. And when they passed, it was 59.4% of the time. I mean, 75% of the time is unheard of. And also there's a narrative that Seattle would run all the time on 2nd and 10. And that's not true. They had 33 dropbacks, which include scrambles. And then they had 28 called runs. So they were fairly balanced.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, my opinion has been that the running game is fine, and it's not as efficient, or it's probably, it's not like you would want to be a successful passing team over being a successful running team. I think all the time. I think that the most important thing is to be a successful passing team, just like defensively, the most important thing is to be successful against the pass, because that is the strongest point that a team can make. And, the Seahawks get involved in so many close fourth quarters that it's really going to come down to the pass in a lot of those situations. And we've seen that the Seahawks, when they lose, it's typically in the fourth quarter that they're, that they have an opportunity to win or lose. And a lot of the times, this season, it felt like when they needed their offensive line or their passing game to make a play, there was a sack or a penalty, or they just fell short and the passing wasn't there, or defensively they couldn't make the stops that they needed to make when the other team started to pass. And that's something that they need to address next season, as well as we said we would get into the defense. But in general, like, not being able to close out those games, passing is, more important. And we see a correlation, at least between Super Bowl winners and conference championship winners and pass defense and passing ability on offense. And I think that that's really important. But at the same time, I think running does play an important factor in the game as well. But what I think is that the running backs themselves, when you go from Todd Gurley to CJ Anderson, when you go from, Marshawn Lynch to Thomas Rawls in some cases, you do get the same amount of production perhaps, or value, or maybe more. And that I don't think that teams should invest heavily in the running back position, even though we saw last year and the year before, that when the Seahawks had really bad running backs, that did affect them in a certain way, but they also weren't as good as blocking perhaps for the run, and they didn't have as talented, they didn't get Dwayne Brown until the second half of last season. So that's sort of where I fall with the running back or the running situation. But I do think that running does have some value. And I don't know that anybody, the really fervent, hardcore people to the pass side, would they really support, or I don't know. It's like, would you really want a team? There wasn't a lot of defense for the argument that the Seahawks should be passing more, or like a ton more, that there's not a lot of evidence. Russell Wilson passes about the amount that Drew Brees does, if not, sometimes more.
And well, also, I think you can criticize the approach you can criticize the approach, but only when you criticize the issue's not with Brian Schottenheimer. The issue should be with the front office and how they've constructed the team, because whenever Seattle is asked to constantly pass protect, it falls apart. If you remember the first two games of the season, get at Denver and then at Chicago, the the offense was absolutely brutal. When they drop back, it's a complete mess. And I mean, I acknowledge that, passing may have more value, and well, no, I acknowledge passing has more value. So did Bryce in his thing. And I think another thing Bryce highlighted as well is that since 2016, the turnover rate on rushing plays is 0.5%, whereas the interception rate on passing plays is 1.8%, and strip sacks bump that up to 2.2%. So again, this is the way Pete Carroll wants to play football. He doesn't want risk. He wants less risk, and he wants to keep in games. And the way he's built it, the way his whole philosophy on offense of having a strong running game is the fact that he wants his defense to be able to come up in the fourth quarter and win the game, right? That's not a Brian Schottenheimer issue. So if we're discussing, Brian Schottenheimer is not good enough, that's not Brian Schottenheimer. Your issue should be with Pete Carroll and the front office for building, the offense how Pete Carroll, wants it to be built.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to go back to, I mean, in this case, the head coach, because Pete Carroll is basically the GM, I mean, they're basically working together, but at the same time, Pete Carroll has got a pretty strong hand in the matter in terms of the personnel and making sure that he's getting the team that he wants. And certainly this, it is a team that runs that he wants. And, I don't think I still don't think that the strategy itself of having a strong run game and a really great defense is bad. I think that it did, help them in 2013. It did help them in 2014. It helped them win the second most games in the NFL from 2012 to maybe now 2018. I haven't fully got that on my screen right now, but I believe that was recently true. And, make regular playoff appearances. And then you would say, okay, but they're not getting that far into the playoffs in the last 4 or 5 years. And that's fair too. And you say, okay, well then they need to do something differently. But I do think too, like they got themselves, as you brought up with the quarterback contracts and the rookie contracts, they put them, they got into a situation where they had to make changes last year. They had to, they opted to release Richard Sherman so that they could be stronger at other positions as opposed to going ultra cheap, when they maybe wouldn't have been able to retain Justin Coleman and Deion Jordan, who didn't end up doing a lot, and Ed Dixon, and like certain things that they wanted to spread that money around to. Obviously, trading Michael Bennett did not save them any money, but I guess they had other thoughts there in terms of the locker room. They lost a lot of players, and they came back and they basically did the same as they did a year ago, if not a little bit better, which I think is still pretty impressive given the situation. Not every team in the NFL is set up to be able to win a championship next season or the next season. So, they did okay there, and we could say that they made mistakes, and and say that they could have gone a different route and done better here, like in the draft. Was it better to have Rashad Penny and Rasheem Green rather than Leighton Vander Esch, or rather than, making a move up for Derwin James, or whatever you want to call it out? There's certain things that we could talk about in terms of, they're not perfect. And Bill Belichick also, we have to, I guess everyone's goal is what's Bill Belichick's secret, because the Patriots suck at drafting many times. They don't get a lot of value out of their draft. And they also went with a running back in the first round. And then they had Isaiah Wynn, and he didn't play. He got injured and he didn't play. So it's always thinking of, well, where do we get to that point, I guess, in order to consistently. And part of that goes into, I guess you got to find a way to get into a division with the Dolphins, Bills, and Jets, because that goes into a lot of the Patriots' success and the amount of conference championships they've appeared in the last 20 years. So there's a lot of things that I think that's my main thing is there are nuances and variables and a lot that goes into the soup every year. And overall, I mean, I guess, Matty, overall, where would you count this 2018 Seahawks season in terms of the expectations and the results? Was it a success? Was it a B grade, a C grade, a D grade? Where does that fall?
Well, like you said, just quickly, like you said, it's never black and white, even though black and white is what will get the most clicks or will get, the most attention. And that is really what I've tried to point out with the whole Schottenheimer thing. I mean, all the things you mentioned can't really be attributed to Schottenheimer. And Overall, the thing with the Cowboys game was, I mean, I could write so much on the Cowboys game and still never really have an answer because, but it came down to just not getting it done on third downs and but it was the same approach as they had all season. And I think against the Cardinals, I wrote an article about how they were dreadful on third downs as well in their first game. I think that was week 4, where they went like, I don't know, they were very bad on third downs, just like they were against the Cowboys. And that is the danger if the run game doesn't get popping. And the guards were injured against Dallas, and they weirdly they ran off tackle and to try set up, I guess, where they believe in setting up play action off the run as well, which you can question, but that's something Pete Carroll believes in as well. But yeah, that was to try set up little dump offs into the flat. Yes, Schottenheimer has a short passing game and an intermediate passing game, but people say he doesn't, which just isn't true. But to answer your question, because that was very waffly, I'd say overall it was a success. It's just the Dallas game really did leave a very disappointing taste in the mouth. But you can't forget, like, again, it wasn't just the offense. The defense gave up there was 2 huge defensive pass interference penalties. KJ Wright trying to catch and turn with someone. Justin Coleman on third down, bit on like a shallow route, and then the guy went over the top of him and he just bumped into him basically. There was 2 critical penalties there, and then there was penalties on the offensive line where they were in third down. They were like, okay, the run game's not working, we're in the fourth quarter now. And then, that Pete Carroll thing of you can only win games in the fourth quarter, and out they came. And while I agree Pete Carroll's strategy of strong run game and strong defense wins football games, when you're in a third down in that situation, you come out passing all the time.
I guess maybe I'm misremembering, and I don't think, but it was 17-14. Wasn't it 17-14 when it was 3rd and 14 and they didn't stop Dak Prescott from running for that first down, almost touchdown? I mean, if they make that stop on 3rd and 14, they probably win the game.
Yep, the defense didn't quite get it done either. But people, I think, came back to, and I can see why, but people came back to, it's Schottenheimer's fault, let's just blame him. And I'm coming across as a massive Brian Schottenheimer fan. I'm not. I just think, I think he's done a good job this year. I really do.
What is that so taboo? Why do we have to make it taboo? I think a lot of it comes down to the perceptions of Brian Schottenheimer going into the year, which is a lot of people didn't like the hire.
Exactly. That's exactly what it comes down to. And if you looked at, say we were privy to what his, I don't know, objectives were this year, it would have been to build confidence in Russell Wilson, make him a passer in the pocket who can navigate, step up, doesn't try scramble backwards, doesn't duck his eyes to the rush. Wilson improved in all of those areas. And then the other one would be to get back a run game, get back an identity of not just running the ball, but he had a clear identity in pass plays. His main thing was a Yankee crosser, which is basically a 2-route receiver combination. And yes, a 2-route receiver combination gets criticized, but it enables you to have more guys pass protecting because the offensive line isn't very good at pass protecting. So the Yankee crosser would be one receiver running just deep downfield and the other receiver running a deep over or crossing route. And then his other play was a Y cross concept where he'd just have a receiver running a crossing route and Wilson would hit that off play action. And he had and even in the run game as well, like I've said, they had a clear identity of inside zone, duo, and then a few things off that. And in the passing game, a few things off his concept. The best play callers all have a clear identity. Look at Sean McVay, the golden standard right now. His is, running wide zone and then play action hit crosses. He runs, what annoys me as well is Schottenheimer runs the exact same things as the best play callers. He has a similar identity. It's just mixed in with what Pete Carroll wants and what does work at his best. So, and you look at his job remit in the off season, and I think he's met, year one, they've met it. And he had to deal with less than ideal personnel. Will Disley going down, who was becoming a guy who Wilson could hit up the seam. And because they want to block first, they had to put Fant there, and Fant can't really catch the ball or run routes even.
Yeah.
So Ed Dixon, he whiffed so many times on crackback blocks for tosses, like that he wasn't reliable enough as a run blocker to line him up in line regularly and then have him as the intermediate target. So that there's just so many variables. And as we've said, like, people are being influenced by their, Brian Schott, really? Like, he's the guy? Like, the Bears just got Najee, or, this is what Pete Carroll wants. And Brian Schottenheimer did it, and he did it well. And the offense was pretty good. They scored a lot of points. Let's not get it twisted. Like, I saw after the Cowboys game and the loss, the Seahawks Twitter account tweeted out that since week 10, the Seahawks have scored the second most points in the league behind the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, stuff like that is relevant. Like, it was a success. And I think what now has to be the thing is where it depends what personnel they give Schottenheimer, but can he build off that?
And I would also, I don't know, this is, I think back to Kyle Shanahan with the Atlanta Falcons, because I remember in Kyle Shanahan's first season with the Atlanta Falcons in 2015, it was also an offensive coordinator hire, given a quarterback, in Matt Ryan that may have been his best quarterback that he had ever had. And that first season, Matt Ryan, his numbers weren't that great, and the offensive numbers weren't that great. But everybody kind of, a lot of people were critical of it, I'm sure. But then I also heard, things of, he's installing something. It's going to take a minute. He's making a lot of changes, and you've got to wait it out a little bit. And then in 2016, of course, Matt Ryan wins the MVP. Kyle Shanahan gets touted as this great offensive genius that he had not been called before. He was also called a nepotistic hire, and it was also downplayed, and people didn't love Kyle Shanahan. And he got the 2015 season to sort of change some things. 2016, they blow up. They almost win the Super Bowl. 2017, of course, he's this big name hire. He goes over to the San Francisco 49ers, and people are still two years after no success in San Francisco, people are still defending Kyle Shanahan and saying, wait, he didn't have his quarterback and whatever, and all these other things. And it's, and I think that Kyle Shanahan could be, he is probably a very smart offensive guy and everything, but the perception that is touted is what I find interesting, because it was that 2015 he needs to install it, 2016 it blows up. As you said, 2018, Brian Schottenheimer, nepotistic hire, did have success in the past with the New York Jets, sort of doing the same thing in running the football. Did a lot with Mark Sanchez, almost got to the Super Bowl with Mark Sanchez twice. And a lot of people saying, well, let's see what he can do with the first time he's had a really good quarterback. And Russell Wilson, he sets a new career high in passer rating and gets back above 8 yards per attempt and sets a franchise record in touchdown passes. And, there's certainly things where you could say oh, well, he could have been better, or he should have been. The offense could have been better. The passing offense could have chose to pass more and this and this and that. But then, as you said, if he's learning new things, if he's had a new offensive coordinator for the first time in his entire career, and that offensive coordinator is saying, well, I just have a few tweaks here. I want you to improve on this and improve on that. They took away a lot of Russell Wilson's rushing attack and said, we want you to do more, we want less designed runs. I want the zone read option, but I don't really want it to be an option. I want you to just hand it off. We're going to do some different things. And they did do different things. Would you say that going into 2019 for the Seattle Seahawks, would you expect then, in a Kyle Shanahan way, the offense to sort of become more comfortable in Wilson's hands? And what sort of players would you expect them to go out and look for on the free agent market or in the draft that would sort of help Brian Schottenheimer continue to go down that path that he wants to go to, or Pete Carroll to go to, in order for Russell Wilson and the offense to succeed even more next season?
Well, I think part of it is going to be, it's a great point that it's a first year with a coordinator, and generally, I think Sean did a really good piece on how regression with an offensive coordinator is to be expected. It's the league-wide norm, and actually, the Seahawks offense improved this year, so that's interesting. I think part of it will be, if the defense can get better, they'll get off the field quicker, and the offense will have more possessions, which is part of it. But also, I think Wilson was still getting comfortable in the offense. His career longevity is going to really improve if he can learn, and he is learning and has learned more pocket skills. I'm not saying he's not a pocket passer. He's elite from the pocket. He's an elite quarterback, and it seems like that sort of prefacing, that sort of preface or preface, I don't know how you pronounce that one, but that sort of thing is needed because people get very sensitive over, criticizing Russell Wilson, and he does, he did still duck his eyes to the rusher on occasions. He did still look a bit skittish in the pocket, but that calmed down. He's never been a guy who can throw that well, intermediate sort of throws, because Seattle's offensive line isn't like the Saints, where Drew Brees can clamber up in the pocket, but in between his guards and somehow find a passing lane, because the Saints' offensive line, for one, is incredible at pass protecting, and also Wilson's never really done that in his career. People would quote like he's had to throw tight window stuff and tough throws, like he had the highest tough throw percentage with that PFF measure. Well, Wilson's best at beating man coverage. When teams run man coverage, what Schottenheimer would do is run the Y cross concept, so have a receiver running over the middle, and it does come down to threading it in to that guy as he tries to outrun the guy following him. So, and then in zone, Wilson has a tendency to, struggle to process it and diagnose it. And often the stuff he hits against zone is either like a one read sort of thing, or he'll extend the play and make an unbelievable throw because he is an unbelievable quarterback. But he sometimes inexplicably holds onto the ball and doesn't take the opening, or doesn't anticipate the route coming open and stuff like that. And people would say, part of that being sort of looking gun shy is because Pete Carroll's so turnover averse. Well, maybe it is, but I think all of these things, all of these so-called flaws of Wilson's game, and everyone has flaws, yes, they were already improving this year from last year, where he's basically shell-shocked from the I don't know how he even survived. The fact he's played every single game as a Seahawk, he's suited up every single time, never been inactive, is incredible, given the just car crash, like destruction of some of the Tom Cable offensive lines. But the fact now that he's been improving this year, I think he will improve onto next year. I'm not sure. You said what players can they add to make things easier? I think Seattle definitely needs another guy who's quick and good at separating. Looking at what Schottenheimer runs, it's all a lot of stuff which is aimed at getting guys running across the field and beating guys over the middle and that sort of thing. So they need like a nippy sort of burner type, I'd say, or maybe a big body. I mean, Wilson over the intermediate is a bit of an issue. So maybe, I remember with Sidney Rice, he always used to throw a really nice jump ball for him. He tried that with David Moore, and David Moore regressed slightly. So perhaps they go for another big body target, but because of the lack of resources, and really, if you actually look at the weakness of Seattle this year, if you want to point fingers, it was mainly the defense. I think they're probably going to draft more defensive guys. And as I said at the start of this, that should hopefully give the offense more possessions because they'll get off the field quicker.
Yeah. And so let's get into a little bit of the draft. Obviously I said you're working on a new series in the offseason called Draft on Tape. You did your first one with West Virginia tight end Trayvon Wesco. So people can go to Field Goals to read the full breakdown on that. But first of all, like, what was your personal grade for the Seahawks 2018 draft? Looking at the players that you had looked at prior to the draft, or the ones that you liked, and Seattle made a ton of picks, and then they picked some guys in undrafted free agency like Poona Ford, who seems to have a pretty bright future with the team. What was your overall assessment of taking Rashad Penny in the first round and then Rasheem Green in round 3? And did you have any feelings on some of the players? We talked about Will Dissly a little bit. Obviously, they picked up Michael Dixon, Shaquem Griffin, Jamarco Jones, and so on. And the Seahawks, for John Schneider getting criticized sometimes for his drafts, with their earlier picks, they also do something that not very many teams do, if any, which is, they did get Chris Carson in round 7. They got David Moore in round 7. And even if David Moore regressed, I mean, as a round 7 player, he's already surpassed almost every round 7 player. He's in the top 5% already of round 7 players. So they do get a little bit more in the later parts of the draft than most teams. And I think that is because that is a large part because they do pick up so many extra picks. As you said, they've only got 4 picks this year. But what was your assessment of the draft class last year? And then at the end of this season, how did you feel? Did you feel that some of your stuff, that some of your opinions were confirmed and maybe something that you were wrong about?
I was very shocked after Rashad Penny went in the first round. I attended the Senior Bowl. I'm attending the Senior Bowl this year, so we'll have coverage of that on the site. But also, last year I attended the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, and I saw Rashad Penny in the flesh, and he was okay. I was like, oh, he's a nice 3rd rounder. He's a nice 2nd rounder. Second round could be a bit steep for him. But yeah, he looks good. And then he went in the 1st round. I was like, oh my word, that is incredible. Jaw dropped. Kind of expected them to trade down. I kind of wanted them to try get someone like Will Hernandez, who on reflection maybe he's not quite the mauler type they want at guard. And I wanted them to get someone like Howard Landry, who would have really added bend and explosion. But I think the Rashad Penny pick, I mean, there was rumors that the Browns wanted to draft him, and there's rumors that the Patriots wanted him as well. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if such things were leaked by the Seahawks front office themselves. But yeah, that was shocking. And from a Seahawks front office perspective, you could see that they wanted to get back to a dominant run game. They really want. They were gunshot. They're afraid about running backs being banged up. You had the fragile CJ Prosise. You didn't really know what Chris Carson was at that stage. He'd flashed but got injured, and then Mike Davis is just kind of a guy. And the year before, their running back situation was absolutely awful. So you could see it from that sense, but it felt a bit reactive and a bit overly reactive, and I didn't particularly like it. And after the draft, you had John Schneider. After the 1st round, you had John Schneider quoting. He quoted a PFF stat, which was Rashad Penny had the most yards after contact in college, and I have a bit of an issue with that sort of stat because when I watched the tape, Rashad Penny, whenever he was quite willing to go down, as we've seen actually as a Seahawk, just put himself on the floor, which is, protecting himself. But also when he was in the hole and a leg tackle he'd just go down, he'd get dropped. But a lot of his yards after contact were ones where he'd burst through a hole. He'd read the hole, which was nice. But then like a defensive lineman would like tap him with like a hand at the chest or like a weak arm, and then he'd be gone and it'd be a touchdown. And that's why his yards after contact were so great, because he'd just have so many arm tackle high up, but he's busted that, and then he'd be off to the races. So the whole thing was not great. But then on reflection, and even like on reflection, the draft's been great. And like you said, because of that late round success and Trey Flowers, oh my goodness, I did not see that coming. I remember I was watching Baker Mayfield play against Oklahoma State, and I was like, this Trey Flowers guy is like really, really bad. He couldn't tackle. They quoted after the draft that, he was a good tackler. Well, he was willing, but I didn't think he was a good tackler. But he has taken on the Seahawks cornerback technique, the step kick, which is where, you wait at the line of scrimmage, you step to keep yourself patient for the wide receiver's release. And then as he releases downfield, you kick back the way the receiver's going from your press alignment. He's taken that on perfectly. He's shown, like, I went back when in the off season, I looked at who could be the cornerback too. And I said I didn't think he'd be able to start, but he showed Seahawks traits, and he did have Seahawks traits in college. But my word, has he built on them? Looking in at the quarterback, wanting to attack the football. And honestly, towards the end of the season, teams were going after Shaquille Griffin, even before he hurt his ankle, far more than they were going after Trey Flowers. Trey Flowers was barely thrown at, gave up a few slants. That's kind of natural in this scheme. But other than that, he was kind of lights out. And if he can add some ball production, he could be like really, really good. I wrote an article on him saying how he could be like Richard Sherman good. And I do believe that if he can maintain his current progress, it's absolutely ridiculous that he's a 5th round rookie safety convert. He'd never played cornerback. He'd played kind of in the slot, but never outside cornerback. And yet the progress he had.
Yeah.
And then you look at like a guy like Will Disley.
Is that something, just before we move on, I mean, is that something that obviously Richard Sherman was sort of the mold for a lot of teams after his success, and Brandon Browner was a bigger cornerback. But, we also saw Chris Richard go to the Dallas Cowboys and turn Byron Jones into a cornerback, and he had never played cornerback in his career either prior to 2018. And then Byron Jones is a Pro Bowler and considered one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL now. Is that something that we should expect to be a trend, and maybe something to look for in this draft in terms of looking for a safety size players who can play cornerback?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I remember Obi Melifonwu, he got released by the Raiders, and now he's with the Patriots. But there was talk of him becoming like, the next Seahawks long cornerback, and I do quite like that as a idea, because I mean you have all these guys in college and they're backpedaling. I mean, I'm now a defensive backs coach, and I really do not like backpedaling. Nor does Nick Saban. I could go on way too long about backpedaling, but anyway. With a guy who's a safety, he will have backpedaled, but he won't have played outside cornerback technique necessarily. So that makes them a moldable ball of clay, if you like. You can really just coach them your fundamentals. They don't have to unlearn the bad stuff, and they're long. They'll be slept on as a cornerback guy, and you can get good value. I remember at the time there was Simeon Thomas, who's I think went to the Cleveland Browns. He was another long guy who I thought, he screams Seahawk. He had the over 32-inch arms measurement, which is, if you don't know, Rob Statton, who you've had on the show and does Seahawks draft blog, I think he was the first guy really to get onto this. But the Seahawks have never taken a cornerback who hasn't had 32-inch arms or greater. Simeon Thomas, he went in the 6th round and to the Browns, and he was like an actual outside cornerback who had played long sort of press. And he's now on the Seahawks actually, but and he ran fast as well. He was the guy who I thought they might go for, but instead they went for Flowers, and I was like, oh wow, well, I'm not sure about that. But the main thing, if we're looking at like future potential Seahawks guys who could do well, is like you said, a guy maybe who has never played the actual position, but from at safety, you had Flowers playing. He was still like looking in and still playing zone technique, and occasionally they'd have him from safety play like a deep half, which it wasn't hard to translate that to a deep outside third shell zone sort of thing. So there were some translatable traits, which, as I've said in that article that I wrote on cornerback 2 prospects. But it's very interesting to see. I mean, this draft, I'm definitely going to be looking at safeties who are, have got 32-inch arms, aren't really thought of that highly, but might, but play aggressive, which is what Flowers did. And he came down to the football, flew around the football, even though he was a bit out of control. That is definitely something where we can look at Seattle and be like, this guy might be a Seahawk. And you got to say, Pete Carroll, the job he's done coaching up Trey Flowers is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing you can't really criticize the Seahawks and Pete Carroll in their development of cornerbacks, and in terms of safeties, obviously they also changed things in the NFL with Cam Chancellor, and his draft pick as a 5th rounder in 2010, and then he became an all-pro strong safety, and unfortunately his career ended last season, and we haven't had that same. Bradley McDougald has also blossomed a bit under Pete Carroll, though maybe he was underrated with Tampa Bay. A lot of focus this season then on Tedrick Thompson and then Delano Hill. Really quickly, what were your assessments on Tedrick Thompson and Delano Hill, and what do you think? Do you think that those are capable players to have in the mix next year to start at free safety or strong safety if needed, or is that going to be a pretty big need?
It's a tough one because Delano Hill, he was a guy who in college, I thought he was a nice sort of press man-to-man guy who want in the slot, kind of taking away guys. And his best snaps as a Seahawk were him playing man-to-man in the slot on a tight end, which wasn't really a surprise. And he brought a bit more sort of stuff in the box, better run fits and angles than Thompson, whereas Thompson brings better range. So it came down to, in terms of, we never actually got to, there was very few times that both of them were available for the Seahawks to select or start, but it came down to whether you wanted Bradley McDougald playing like high, so Bradley McDougald having to cover a deep zone and having to run sideline to sideline sort of thing, or if you wanted Bradley McDougald coming down to play the run. So I think both of them are good. Like they're solid, but they're nothing special. And it is just such a shame about the Earl Thomas situation because he is a Hall of Fame safety. And while teams have spread it out more, and we saw Seattle run more two high zones, and I think with middle of the field open coverage, I think with Thomas, they would be able to run more single high defense, and he does cover up stuff, and it is such a shame because he's a Hall of Fame talent, and it would be so nice to have him again because you don't find people like that. It's not, especially not when you got the 21st pick in the first round, and you will be trading down multiple times because you've got so few picks. It is such a shame that he is not going to be a Seahawk. It is interesting.
Just thinking about it though, and I've thought about it a lot, and people have dismissed the idea of bringing Earl Thomas back for the most part, but I do think that there is some logic out there to say, if you're the Seahawks and you're talking to Earl Thomas's agent and Earl Thomas, and you're saying, look, you've broken your leg twice in the last 3 years. You didn't play very much last year. You were very good when you did play, and you've been in Seattle for your entire career. Or, it was with the Seahawks and it was with Pete Carroll's defense that you helped, you became this all-pro Hall of Fame safety, even though you would have been a great safety in your own right, no matter where you went. But you do know that it works here. And as you hit 30 years old, you could go to another situation and it may not work as well. And teams out there right now who have sort of devalued the safety market, and we've seen other free safeties like Eric Reed or Trey Boston not get contracts like they thought they would, or George Iloka getting released and then going to the Vikings and not playing a very big role there. Earl, you might go on that free agent market and find that you're not getting the offers that you wanted the Seahawks to give you, you wanted us to give you when you were holding out, and we didn't give that to you because we saw this market out here that wasn't valuing safeties very highly. And maybe there's some argument to be made out there that a franchise tag, a 1-year deal that pays him, $10 million or $9 million or whatever it would be, is potentially actually more than he would get on the market, or right in line with what he get in the market, because I could see a situation, Richard Sherman went out there last year coming off of a torn Achilles, and he signed a deal with the San Francisco 49ers that was not very Richard Sherman friendly. It was very team friendly. And if Richard Sherman didn't have a good season, which he did have a good season, the 49ers could have cut him, and it basically would have been a 1-year deal without much left on the table. He didn't get all of the money that he could have gotten because it was incentive laden, and he missed games with injury, and it's still a risky situation for Richard Sherman. So, sure, the 49ers could offer Earl Thomas a deal and say, hey, come play with us. But there's a good chance it still would be a 1-year deal for $7 or $8 million. A lot of people criticize the Seahawks, for not bringing back Sheldon Richardson, for trading for Sheldon Richardson and not bringing him back. But Sheldon Richardson only got a 1-year, $8 million from the Minnesota Vikings. The Seahawks instead opted to sign Tom Johnson and Shamar Stephen and get basically twice as many defensive tackles for half as much money. Obviously, Tom Johnson didn't last for very long, and then he went back to the Vikings, and the Seahawks were criticized for that too. But I think there is an argument to be made out there that a 1-year deal with the Seahawks is potentially Earl Thomas's best option, and that it could be sold to him as his best option, or they could franchise tag him if they manage to come to an agreement with Frank Clark prior to the deadline to do so. So I do think that there are options out there, and certainly, based on what you've said too about Thompson and Hill just being sort of ho hum as safeties and nothing special, that there is the Seahawks benefit too to bring back Earl Thomas, have Bradley McDougald at strong safety, say, why don't you come back to a team that is much more likely to win 10 games than the 49ers are? I mean, you could go to the Dallas Cowboys, but I think they're pretty happy at this point with Xavier Woods. They don't need to necessarily spend a bunch of money on a safety, especially they've got their contracts to work out with DeMarcus Lawrence and a potential extension for Dak Prescott. There are other considerations right now to be made. And certainly I think Earl Thomas, I don't know. For me, the door doesn't have to be shut, nor should it be shut, especially given the caliber and the other options out there, of which there are not many.
Yeah, I think that would be so nice because Seattle had to get pretty creative for Seattle when it came to coverage. And I mean, yeah, part of that was a response to how offenses are attacking teams now. But also, Earl Thomas does allow you to be a lot more aggressive schematically. You can play a lot more cover 3. You can, and if they didn't get him, they'd create kind of another need, because then you've got to try get a safety kind of in the draft to add some competition, or you just say, and the durability of Delano Hill, fractured a hip, didn't he? And you've got and Tedrick Thompson hasn't been that durable, and your main need is pass rush. You can't be having too many needs, and you've got a Hall of Fame safety. I feel like Seattle is probably a bit snake bitten by third contracts after what happened with Cam Chancellor and I forget the other one, but like you said, he's coming off an injury, and you can point towards his durability. And if they could patch up the relationship between him and Pete Carroll and the front office and the team, and if he could come back and just buy in, not saying he hasn't bought in, but if he could come back like fully motivated, that would be such a added bonus for Seattle and really help this off season, which as I said, it's going to be difficult to improve. Like, once you look at, they've got about $60 million in cap space. There's a few guys who need re-signing. I assume they're going to get they'll definitely get Frank Clark back, but then he's going to command a lot of money, and deservedly so. Then you look at like DJ Fluker, the other guys who need re-signing. There's not going to be that much money left, especially if they're looking to add a pass rusher as well. And so getting Earl would be massive, because you can't, he's a once in a blue moon type of player. You don't just find them, and he's not. If it's just, it's very frustrating. It's a difficult situation.
Yeah. Well, we only got a little bit of time here left. I want to get to something else briefly, especially because, as you mentioned, you're going to the Senior Bowl. Before I do that, I just want to pay a little bit of a thank you to our sponsor before people sign off, and just let you know that this is a free episode of the Seaside Chats podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/field goals. A lot of the episodes available at patreon.com/field goals for $2 a month, just $2 a month over there at patreon.com for the supporters. This episode, though, is brought to you by Injury Legal Center, a personal injury law firm who's been specializing in auto accident cases in California, Nevada, and Washington for over 20 years. So if you have an auto accident or a slip and a fall, call Injury Legal Center toll free at 855-631-3830. Again, that's 855-631-3830 for Injury Legal Center. They only, work on a contingency basis, so you don't have to pay anything out of your pocket for legal fees or doctor visits unless they win your case. So thank you to Injury Legal Center for sponsoring the show and letting this one come out to you for free. And, if you want, you can always support the show at patreon.com, $2 a month to get the regular episodes of Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. But, as you mentioned, Matty, you're going to the Senior Bowl coming up here in Mobile. What exactly can people expect from the Senior Bowl this year? Who are the names maybe that you'll be looking out for, or the positions? Like, obviously the Seahawks, they picked 21st in the first round this year, and as you said, they've only got 3 picks after that right now. Obviously, the expectation is that they'll trade down as they have for each of the last 7 drafts. They've traded down or out of the first round, whether that was for a player or to just trade down and pick up additional picks. Picking 21st, it's another opportunity. They were picking 18th last year. They traded down eventually and got to 27, where they picked Rashad Penny, and they picked up a 3rd rounder if they're picking 21st this year. But it is an interesting draft too, right, in the sense of how many defensive linemen and pass rushers there are going to be at the top, and it should be interesting to watch how that plays out. But what should people expect this year from the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, well, like you said, there's a lot of pass rushers and defensive line talent, and I think the Senior Bowl class reflects that that is the strength of the draft, which is nice because maybe the Seahawks are very good at planning ahead, because their need really is pass rush and defensive line help. And I mean, one guy who's quite fun is Chase Winovich. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl. I'm excited to see him from Michigan. High effort, but also like surprisingly bendy, and yeah, quite an exciting player. I'm a defensive backs guy, so I'm kind of biased, but I like. I mean, say if the Seahawks didn't re-sign Earl Thomas, Darnell Savage from Maryland is going to be there, and he's a guy who he's a safety, but he's a matchup guy. You could move him all sorts of places. In Seattle, they had their bandit package where they put a lot of defensive backs on the field, and Akeem King executed that role nicely, matching up with tight ends. But Darnell Savage could come in and start at safety in, like, he has range for like a 2-high shell, but then he could also use his closing speed and quick acceleration to match up with guys on the back end. I really like as well Isaiah Buggs out of Alabama. He's a disruptive defensive lineman. I mean, Alabama's defensive line is absolutely stacked. You got Quinn and Williams. He'll be going absolutely nowhere near Seattle's pick, probably a top 3 pick. He will not be at the Senior Bowl because he doesn't need to be. But Isaiah Buggs, I think, is someone who could really gain a lot. And you've noticed I've only mentioned defensive players, but yeah, there's also the guy I wrote about on Draft on Tape, which is Trayvon Wesco. And I had someone a bit earlier ask me, why would Seattle prioritize a tight end when they've got defensive backs and they need offensive linemen, they need a pass rusher? And no, they wouldn't prioritize a tight end over those. But because, as you said, they're going to be trading down in the draft, they will need to get a tight end potentially who can block, because Will Dissly, of course, tore his patella tendon, incredible blocker, but he could also catch, and they won't want to repeat, as I've spoke about earlier. They won't want to repeat of having George Fant, who's a great blocker but cannot catch or run routes. They won't want to repeat of that. So doubling down on a big blocking tight end who can also catch with soft hands, surprising speed, and a bit of wiggle for a big man in West Virginia tight end Trayvon Wesco, who you can read about on the site. He's 6'4", he's over 260 pounds, and he can kind of do it all. Having him and Dissly, well, that would be fun. But he'd also be a nice sort of cover for if Dissly isn't fully healthy. And patella tendon is very difficult to come back from, despite his work ethic being impressive. So it's a fun group. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be good to. I haven't really watched that many of the guys so far. I've mainly just watched the safeties, and they're not that great, and nor the cornerbacks. But I'll be tweeting out guys with over 32-inch arms. It's time to focus on the draft, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see who catches the eye as a potential Seahawk, and that's what I hope to do in this Draft on Tape thing. Just write about players who feel Seahawky, who could fit the Seahawks mold, and then of course, after they've tested, will it get even more value in the analysis, because then we'll be able to see, oh, well, he fits the Seahawks profile. And especially at defensive end, they don't really take someone who doesn't have athleticism. They won't look for, like, I've seen Montez Sweat get or Sweet, I don't know how you want to pronounce that, but he's a guy who's been mocked to Seattle occasionally, and I'd say he's too much of a technician. They rarely have taken a guy who's the finished article at defensive end. They like to take a raw athlete who's just, explodes off the screen, like Frank Clark, for instance, who he had a few like bit moves, but he was quite unrefined in a pass rushing sense. But while he showed a bit of savvy, he was just raw explosion off the screen. And I think that is the sort of guy that they're gonna target and go after.
Yeah.
In this draft, that could be like a Jackie Polite, who's not going to be at the Senior Bowl, but then he's getting real high talk. He's getting like top 10 sort of talk. So, we'll have to see about that. But he's a explosive first step quickness guy. But really, they're going to be looking for someone who's because of how they will trade down. It'll probably be someone who's got maybe some off the field issue, or maybe like a slightly concerning medical. They're going to have to take a risk if they want an explosive guy, given where they're going to eventually make their first pick.
Really, really quickly, because we are running out of time. Really quickly, because I'm curious. Just we it's also a concern for the Seahawks because the 49ers and Cardinals are picking in the top 2, which is really interesting and obviously, but how dangerous, how strong, how generational, I guess, are players like Quinnen Williams or Nick Bosa or Josh Allen? And is there a decent chance at least that a team would trade up for a quarterback and knock one of those teams down, whether it was for Dwayne Haskins or Kyler Murray? Is there a decent chance to trade up, and just how difficult and generational are those pass rushing prospects at the top?
Oh, they're a problem. Yeah. Russell Wilson, it doesn't get any easier for him or the offensive line. I mean, they're different players. Like I think it will be Nick Bosa and then Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams is absolutely ridiculous. It's almost like people at the start of the year, I don't think they really saw it coming, and all the talk was Ed Oliver, who's he's definitely not finished. He definitely needs to refine elements of his game, but he's so explosive too. But yeah, it's going to be Quinnen Williams and Nick Bosa. And Nick Bosa, explosive edge rusher, just it's a problem. But you said about teams trading up for a quarterback. I think that's very likely to happen. Teams want their quarterback, and they'll get their quarterback. And if there's another team who wants a quarterback, then they've got to go ahead of that team. And the only way to get ahead of that team is to go to the number 1 or number 2. So I think another guy and I don't agree with this, and I don't like it, but I think it could happen. I think Drew Lock is the sort of guy who NFL teams are going to be like, oh, did you see how far he threw that? Wow, he absolutely aired that out. That's an effortless arm. I don't rate him as a quarterback. It's kind of, I don't like comparisons. I don't like player comps, but he kind of reminds me in that sense of Josh Allen, because it was like, oh my God, he's got such a big arm and he can absolutely heave it without even looking like he's trying. And then teams at the Senior Bowl, he's going to be at the Senior Bowl, they're going to be like, wow, Drew Lock can really throw it. And of course, John Gruden is there coaching the one of the teams. He might get excited about Drew Lock, and that could happen. But yeah, Dwayne Haskins looks probably like the best prospect, in my opinion, at quarterback from the bits I've seen. And Kyler Murray's a game-breaking talent, though I think the NFL is probably going to do he's mobile, but they'll probably question whether he can pass that well, when I think he can. But he's a genuine concern. But,
it seems like it's an interesting draft.
It definitely is, and it is nice that it fits the Seahawks' needs. There's, there will be a guy who they can take. But yeah, the one who would terrify me the most is, I really don't want Quinnen Williams anywhere near the NFC West, because his hands, the way he anchors, and also his pass rushing moves. He is like, he's coming out of college and he's got everything, like a bull rush and like club and swims. He can just do everything. So he could line up like you could put him at 1 tech, so like in the A gap, you could put him at 3 tech, so in the B gap, or you could even line him up at edge. He is terrifying.
Matty F Brown, thanks for joining the show. Where can people find you on Twitter, and plug anything else that you may want to plug?
Well, thanks very much for having me. You can find me on Twitter at Matty F Brown, so MATTY F, and then like the color brown. And then, what I'd like to plug is probably just Draft on Tape. That'll be at fieldgirls.com. Follow me on Twitter just to have my tweets from the Senior Bowl. Like I said, I'll be tweeting everything pretty much that I can. And you'll get some videos of practices from me. And yeah, you'll get all the good measures. This guy has 32-inch arms, plus he could be a potential Seahawks defensive back. So there you go.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Matty, for joining the show. Thank you, everyone out there, for listening to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. If you'd like to support the show, it's at patreon.com/fieldgoals, $2 a month to get all the episodes of Seaside Chats and more. We've got giveaways. We've got the Foot Bottles giveaways that's going out this week to some Foot Bottles winners. It is exactly what it sounds like. We've got bobbleheads and posters and more coming up. So if you'd like the show, or if you like field goals, some of the stuff, you can always do that. Follow Matty on Twitter at Matty F Brown. Come to fieldgoals.com. You know where to find us on Twitter. Yeah, that's it. Come back, follow all of Matty's tweets about the Senior Bowl, and then check out Field Goals for his write-ups, draft on tape, and all the other Seahawks news and whatnot and opinions right there on fieldgoals.com. This has been Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Oh, thank you to Injury Legal Center once again. But this has been Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Come back next week for another chat.